Can we stay here for a while? No greeting, no small talk. Just that question dropped right between the dinner plates like it had already been decided somewhere else, sometime before they walked through my door. My name's Benjamin Pierce, I'm 62, and I've been dealing with problems my whole career as an engineer at Boeing, but nothing quite prepared me for this moment. I didn't answer right away. Nathan kept his eyes on the table, tracing the edge of his fork with his thumb, like he was waiting for the moment to pass without having to meet it. Isabella didn't look down. She watched me instead, carefully, quietly, as if my reaction mattered more than anything they'd just said. I set my coffee cup down and folded my hands loosely in front of me. "For how long?" I asked. Nathan shifted slightly in his seat, but he didn't respond. Isabella leaned forward just a fraction, her voice measured. "Just until we're stable," she said. It wouldn't be long. There was no number, no plan, just a phrase that was supposed to make everything sound reasonable. I let the silence sit for a second longer than they expected. Then Nathan added, almost quickly, "You don't really use the upstairs anyway, Dad." That was the first moment something settled clearly into place. Not the request itself, but the assumption behind it. I looked at him, then really looked, waiting for something else to follow. Something that would turn this back into a conversation instead of a conclusion. Nothing came. He stayed where he was, eyes lowered again, letting the statement stand on its own. Isabella didn't interrupt him. She didn't soften it either. "Look, I've spent 30 years solving problems that could bring down aircraft if you got them wrong. You learn to spot assumptions early, and you learn they'll kill you every time. This felt exactly like that." I felt my fingers tighten slightly against each other, then loosen again. "No," I said. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't repeat it, just that one word, placed where their expectation had been. The room changed immediately. Nathan looked up this time, not confused, but caught, like he'd missed a step he thought was already behind him. Isabella didn't move at first. Her expression held for a second longer, then shifted, subtle but unmistakable, not surprise, recalculation. No one spoke. The space between us stretched heavier than before, because now there was something in it that hadn't been there when they arrived. I picked up my cup again, steady, and waited for one of them to decide what came next. They didn't argue. That was the first thing I noticed. No raised voices, no immediate pushback, no attempt to challenge what I'd said. Instead, they shifted subtly, almost smoothly, like this was just another version of the same conversation they had already planned. Nathan leaned forward slightly, his voice quieter now. "We're just trying to get stable, Dad." Isabella followed without hesitation. It wouldn't be permanent. Just until things settle. The words were softer, more careful, but nothing about them changed the shape of what they were asking. I waited, listening for anything else. Something concrete, something defined. There was nothing. No mention of how long, no discussion of what they'd contribute, no plan for what stable actually meant. Just the same expectation dressed differently. Here's the thing about engineering. You don't build anything without specifications. You don't move forward with, "It'll work itself out," or "We'll figure it out later." That's how bridges fall down. I nodded once, more to myself than to them. "I can help," I said. Both of them looked up immediately. "I can give you a small amount to get started," I continued. "And I can lend you more if you need it. We'll write it down properly. Terms, timeline, everything clear." Isabella's expression held for a moment, then tightened into something that resembled a smile, but didn't reach her eyes. "And you can find a place nearby," I added. "Something that fits what you can manage right now." The silence that followed wasn't the same as before. It wasn't shock, it was disappointment. Nathan leaned back, his hand dragging once across his face before he let it drop. "We thought," he hesitated, then finished. "We thought family helps each other." I met his eyes this time. "I am helping," I said, "but helping isn't the same as giving up your home." Isabella's fingers pressed lightly against the edge of the table, then released, like she'd caught herself reacting too quickly. She didn't argue. She didn't agree either. They'd expected something else, not support, not structure, something simpler, something immediate, something that didn't require adjustment or accountability. I could see it in the way they sat there, not angry, not confused, just stalled, as if the conversation had moved somewhere they hadn't prepared for. Nathan exhaled slowly, his gaze drifting away again, searching for another angle, another way to bring it, back to where they'd started. "You know what gets me? In all my years at Boeing, when someone came to you with a problem, they came with data. They came with numbers, timelines, backup plans. What they didn't do was walk into your office and say, "Just trust us, it'll work out." But that's exactly what this was. No data, no timeline, no plan. Just trust us. After they left that night, I sat at that same kitchen table for a long time. The plates were still there, the conversation hanging in the air like something unfinished. My wife Sarah used to say, I overthought everything, that not every problem needed an engineering solution. Maybe she was right about most things. But this felt different. This felt like something that needed more than trust and good intentions. The post showed up 2 days later. Some people disappear when you need them most. No names, no details, just a sentence placed carefully where it would be seen. I read it once, then again. Not because I didn't understand it, but because I did. There was nothing accidental about it. The wording was vague enough to avoid direct confrontation, but specific enough to invite assumptions. Anyone who knew them, who knew me, could fill in the gaps on their own. I didn't respond, I didn't comment, I didn't reach out, but I noticed. Not just the post itself, but the timing, the shift, the way a private conversation had been moved into a public space without ever being acknowledged as such. It wasn't about telling the truth, it was about shaping it. Later that afternoon, I stopped by the mailbox and ran into Mrs. Charlotte Miller from 2 houses down. She smiled when she saw me, the kind of easy, familiar warmth that usually stayed on the surface. "Your son's moving back in, right?" she said casually. "I heard he might be staying with you for a bit." I looked at her, not startled, not confused, just still. "No," I said. Her expression flickered, just briefly. "Oh, I must have misunderstood." "Maybe," I replied. We exchanged a few more words, nothing that mattered, and then I walked back inside, closing the door behind me with the same steady motion I always used. But something had already shifted. It wasn't just that Isabella had posted something online. It wasn't just that people had seen it. It was that a version of events was already moving outward, forming quietly in conversations I wasn't part of, in assumptions I hadn't agreed to. They hadn't just asked me for something. They'd already begun to position the outcome. I sat at the kitchen table again, the same one from dinner, and let the pattern settle into place. Not in pieces, but as a whole. I could finally see clearly. Being an engineer teaches you to document everything. 30 years at Boeing, you learn that assumptions kill projects, and vague specifications destroy budgets. So, I started treating this like any other problem that needed solving. I pulled out a notebook and started writing down dates, times, exact quotes. The initial request, the social media post, the conversation with Mrs. Miller, everything needed to be recorded with the same precision I'd use for aircraft systems. You know what's funny? Back when Sarah was sick, Isabella used to visit all the time. She'd bring flowers, sit with Sarah when I had to work, even helped with the funeral arrangements. I thought she genuinely cared. Now I'm wondering if she was just taking inventory. The house, the insurance payout, my pension status, all of it would have been visible to someone paying attention, someone planning ahead. The listing came up quietly a few days later. I wasn't looking for it, but I recognized their address the moment it appeared. The photos were clean, staged in a way that softened the edges of what had been lived in. Neutral tones, open spaces, careful angles that avoided anything too personal. The price told the truth. Lower than it should have been. Lower than what they'd paid just 18 months ago. I didn't react right away. I just looked at it, letting the numbers settle the way numbers always had for me. Without interpretation, without emotion. Just data points forming a pattern. Here's what I know about numbers. They don't lie. People lie. Circumstances get twisted. Stories change depending on who's telling them. But numbers? They just sit there being what they are. A few days later, more details surfaced. Not directly, never directly. A comment here, a mention there, enough to begin forming a clearer picture. Their business hadn't collapsed overnight. It had been slipping for months, maybe longer. Isabella's social media consulting work that she'd talked about so confidently at family dinners wasn't bringing in the revenue she'd claimed. Nathan's software development contracts were sporadic, feast or famine. Then the rest followed. Multiple credit accounts, not one or two, but several, all close to their limits. A new car leased, not owned. The timing didn't align with stability. I didn't need full statements or exact balances. I'd worked with budgets long enough to recognize the shape of them without seeing every line. This wasn't a fall, it was a build, one decision layered over another, each one manageable on its own, each one justified at the time. Together, something else entirely. I sat at that same kitchen table and traced it backward in my mind, not through memories, but through structure, income, spending, gaps. There had been warning points, moments where things could have slowed, adjusted, corrected. They hadn't. They'd continued forward instead, holding the same pace, the same expectations, as if the numbers would eventually align on their own. They don't. They rarely do. What stayed with me wasn't the amount. It wasn't even the debt. It was the consistency. Nothing about their situation was sudden. Nothing about it was unpredictable. It had formed gradually, clearly, step by step, long before they ever sat across from me at that table and asked for something. They'd already decided I would give. Look, I get it. Young couple, trying to make it work. Hit some rough patches. That's life. But what I can't get past is the assumption that my house was somehow part of their backup plan. Like, it was just sitting there waiting for them to need it. That's not how it works. That's not how any of this works. I started making some calls. Not to them, not about them, just to people who might have useful information. Professional contacts mostly. Guys I'd worked with over the years who'd moved into different industries. You'd be surprised what you can learn when you know who to ask and how to ask it. Not anything illegal, not anything invasive. Just public information put together in the right order. Isabella Pierce had worked for 3 different marketing firms in the past 2 years, each job lasting less than 8 months. That's not building a career, that's bouncing around. And bouncing usually means something isn't working. Nathan's last steady contract had ended 6 months ago. Since then, just small projects, nothing consistent, nothing you could build a budget around. But they'd been living like the money was still coming in. New furniture, expensive dinners, that car lease, all the pieces of a lifestyle that looked successful from the outside. They came back 3 days later, no message first, no attempt to soften the return. Just a knock, then both of them standing there like the conversation had only been paused, not finished. This time, Nathan spoke less. Isabella stepped forward. "We've been thinking," she said. "We could just stay in one part of the house. It wouldn't affect you." I didn't respond. She continued, steady, controlled. "We wouldn't interfere with your routine. You'd barely notice we're there." The phrasing was different, but the direction was the same. Closer now, more specific, more certain. Nathan finally added, not looking at me when he said it, "It's still family property in a way." That landed, not loudly, not sharply, just enough to settle into the space between us and stay there. I looked at him. "No," I said, "it's not." Neither of them spoke. I stepped back slightly, resting my hand against the back of the chair, keeping my voice even. "I already told you what I'm willing to do," I continued. "I can help financially, a small amount to start, more if needed." We put it in writing, clear terms. Isabella's expression didn't change, but something behind it did. "And you find a place that fits what you can afford," I said. The silence stretched again, but this time it wasn't hesitation. It was resistance. "You have more than enough space," Isabella said. There it was. Not a request, a justification. I held her gaze. "Space isn't the same as permission," I said. Nathan shifted beside her, exhaling quietly, but he didn't interrupt. He didn't correct her either. They stood there, not moving forward, not stepping back, caught between what they'd expected and what I was actually saying. For a moment, I thought they might push harder. They didn't. Instead, Isabella nodded once, slow, controlled, as if she was filing something away rather than accepting it. Nathan glanced at me briefly, then looked past me into the house, his eyes lingering just a second too long before dropping again. They left without another word. I closed the door the same way I always did, steady, without force, and stood there for a moment, listening to the quiet settle back into place. But something had already changed, and it wasn't just the conversation. It was the way they'd begun to define what was mine. I was standing in line at the pharmacy when I heard my name. A woman I recognized from a few blocks over stepped beside me, smiling in that familiar, polite way people do when they think they're sharing something positive. "I heard your son's going to be staying with you," she said. "That must be nice, having them close again." I didn't answer right away. She continued, unaware. "Isabella, Mentioned they'll finally have space once they're settled there. Settled there? Not if, not maybe, not even soon. Just when. I nodded once, something neutral enough to end the exchange, and turned back to the counter when it was my turn. I didn't correct her, I didn't explain, I didn't need to. The wording stayed with me long after I left. It wasn't just that they'd talked about moving in, it was how they'd talked about it, like it was already decided, already unfolding, already theirs in a way that didn't require permission. Later that afternoon, another detail surfaced, a casual remark, secondhand but consistent. They hadn't wanted to rent, not because they couldn't find a place, but because it would look bad. I sat with that longer than anything else. Not urgency, not necessity. Image. That was the center of it. Not where they would live, but how it would appear. Not what they could sustain, but what they could present. And my house fit that version perfectly. Here's what really gets me about the whole thing. I worked 30 years to pay off this house. 30 years of overtime, of careful budgeting, of saying no to things we wanted so we could say yes to things we needed. Sarah and I, we planned every major purchase. We saved for emergencies. We lived within our means even when our means were pretty tight. This house isn't just where I live. It's proof that the plan worked. It's proof that you can build something solid if you're willing to do it right. And they wanted to treat it like a safety net they'd never had to weave themselves. I didn't call them. I didn't confront them. Instead, I pulled out the documents, deed records, the quiet paper trail of something built over years without shortcuts. I read through each page slowly, not searching for a problem, but confirming there wasn't one. Then I made the calls I needed to make. An appointment, a review, a consultation. No rush, no announcement, just structure. My attorney's office is downtown. One of those older buildings where the elevators still have operators and the hallways smell like furniture polish and old money. Janet Morrison has been handling my legal work since Sarah died. Mostly simple stuff, but she's thorough. Estate planning review, I told her when I called. Want to make sure everything's buttoned up. She didn't ask why. Good attorneys don't ask why until they need to. The meeting took about 2 hours. We went through everything. The house, the pension, the life insurance payout that came after Sarah's death. The small investment account I'd been building since retirement. Not a fortune by some standards, but enough to make me comfortable and enough to make someone else very interested. You want to establish a trust structure, Janet said. It wasn't a question. I want to make sure what's mine stays mine, I said. And what I choose to give away gets given on my terms, not someone else's. She nodded. She'd seen this before. By the end of the week, I had meetings scheduled with my financial advisor, and the trust paperwork was in motion. The house was going to be properly protected. No more assumptions, no informal understandings that could be stretched or redefined later. I placed the documents back in their folder and set them aside, knowing I hadn't said anything to them yet, and that I didn't need to. Not until they came back and tried again. They came back again. Nathan spoke first. So, what are we supposed to do, Dad? There was no anger in it, no edge. Just something strained, tight, and controlled, like he'd already argued this out in his head and hadn't liked the outcome. I didn't answer right away. I pulled out the chair and sat down, slower than before, letting the movement settle something in the room. They stayed standing for a moment, then Isabella took the seat across from me. Nathan followed, but not fully, half-turned, like he wasn't sure where he belonged in the conversation. I folded my hands on the table. You stay. Where you are, I said, or somewhere smaller. You adjust what you spend. You build back from there. Isabella didn't react. Nathan did. That takes time. I nodded. Yes. The words sat between us without apology. He looked at me then, fully this time, searching for something. An exception, a softening, anything that would change the direction of what I'd just said. For a moment, I almost gave it to him. It was small, quick, the kind of instinct that comes from years of stepping in before things fall too far. I felt it rise just enough to recognize it. Then I let it pass. You work within what you have, I continued, not what you wish you had. Isabella leaned back slightly, her posture shifting. Not defensive, but no longer engaged the same way. The conversation wasn't moving where she wanted it to. Nathan exhaled, slower this time, his shoulders dropping just a fraction. We thought, he started, then stopped. I didn't finish the sentence for him. I didn't need to. The silence that followed wasn't uncertain anymore. It was settled, Not resolved, but defined in a way it hadn't been before. They weren't being denied help. They were being refused something else entirely. And that was what they hadn't prepared for. Look, I've been thinking about this a lot since Sarah died, about what we leave behind, about what we owe our kids and what we don't. Sarah always said the best thing we could give Nathan was the tools to solve his own problems, not the solutions themselves. I think she was right. I saw the listing change first. The price dropped again. Then a few days later, it was marked pending. No message came with it, no explanation, just the quiet confirmation that something had already been decided and carried through. Later that evening, Nathan sent a text. "We're selling, nothing else. No context, no details, just the outcome stated plainly, as if anything more would have required explaining something he wasn't ready to put into words. I didn't ask, I didn't need to. The sale closed quickly. I checked the record out of habit, not curiosity. The number told the rest of the story. They didn't walk away with anything substantial. The debt didn't disappear. It followed them. After that, the changes were harder to see directly, but easier to understand. Nathan's messages became shorter, more controlled, the kind of sentences that say enough to avoid questions, but nothing that invites them. We're figuring things out, just busy. It's fine. It wasn't fine. I heard it in the pauses when he did call, in the way his voice tightened around certain words and avoided others, in what he didn't say at all. There were arguments, not loud, not constant, but steady enough to leave marks. About money, about what had been spent, about what should have been done sooner. They weren't moving in the same direction anymore. Isabella wanted to maintain something that no longer fit. Nathan was trying to hold together something that had already shifted underneath. Him. The distance between those two positions grew quietly, then all at once. A week later, he called again, short, flat. She left. I didn't interrupt. She's staying with her mother. Just for a while. Just for a while. I'd heard that phrase before. There was no anger in his voice, no urgency. Just something emptied out, like the effort it had taken to keep everything aligned had finally run out and nothing was left to replace it. He didn't ask for anything. He didn't need to. And for the first time since that first night at the table, he wasn't trying to move the conversation anywhere. It was simply unfolding where it had to. "You want to come over for dinner tomorrow?" I asked. "Yeah," he said. "Yeah, I'd like that." Months passed without anything dramatic. No sudden recovery, no clean resolution, just movement, slow, steady, and unremarkable in the way real change usually is. Nathan found a place across town. 2 bedrooms, nothing extra. He told me that much without trying to frame it as anything more than what it was. "It works," he said. When I saw it, the space was plain. Most of the furniture didn't match. A table that had clearly been used before. Chairs that didn't come as a set. A couch that had been chosen for function, not appearance. Everything in it had one thing in common. It was paid for. He'd started keeping track of his expenses. Not loosely, not in his head, but written down. What came in, what went out, what remained. There was no pride in it. No attempt to present it as progress. Just process. "I thought it would fix itself," he said once, sitting across from me at his small kitchen table. I didn't respond right away. He continued, quieter now. "I thought if we just held on long enough, it would balance out." I nodded once. It was a familiar thought, common, comfortable, and almost always wrong. Then he added, after a pause that carried more weight than the words themselves, "I thought you would step in." There it was. Not said with accusation, not even expectation anymore. Just something he'd believed long enough that it had become part of how he made decisions. I met his eyes. "I would help you build," I said. "But I won't carry what you chose." He didn't look away this time. He didn't argue either. The silence that followed wasn't defensive. It wasn't strained. It was different. Quieter, but steadier, as if something had finally settled into place without needing to be pushed there. He leaned back slightly, exhaling through his nose. Not in frustration, but in recognition. "I know," he said. And for the first time since all of this began, there was no attempt to redirect the conversation, no search for another angle, no quiet expectation waiting behind his words, just acceptance. And with it, the sense that whatever came next wouldn't be decided by what he could ask for, but by what he was willing to take responsibility for. I made the changes quietly. No announcements, no conversations about it. Just a series of decisions handled the same way I'd handled everything else that mattered. Carefully, completely, without leaving anything open to interpretation. The trust was finalized, the house was protected. Everything had clear terms now, proper documentation, no room for assumptions or informal understandings. That evening, I walked through the house without thinking about what had happened in it, only noticing what was still there. The structure hadn't changed. The furniture was in the same place. The rooms held the same quiet order they always had. But the feeling was different. There was no weight behind it anymore. No sense of something waiting to be negotiated, adjusted, or given up. No quiet expectation sitting just beneath the surface of ordinary moments. Just space, still undisturbed, fully mine. I paused in the doorway between the kitchen and the living room. Not because I needed to, but because I recognized something I hadn't named before. This house had never been extra. It had never been something that could be divided or reassigned depending on who needed it most. It was the result of time, of choices made slowly and followed through completely, of limits kept, even when it would have been easier to ignore them. I'd built it the same way I expected anything lasting to be built, without shortcuts, without borrowing against what wasn't yet secure. And now it stood the same way. Not as something to solve a problem, not as something to fix someone else's life, but as something that remained exactly as it was meant to be, long after everything else had shifted around it. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone isn't what they want, but what they need to learn, and the strength to let them learn it the hard way. A house built with your own hands and paid for with your own sweat isn't just property. It's proof that doing things right, even when it's harder, always pays off in the end.